because we dare to think, to cry, and ask why, and defy those who say we are lesser, to resist and struggle, to speak out and shout no to the madness, to say yes to reason, to laugh and to dream of and work for and fight for a world that we will set free. Because we hope and dream and think for full liberation.
We open today's program with a few lines from a spoken word piece written for International Women's Day that appears on Revcom.us, and we're going to be playing that full poem later in today's program. But first, welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. This is our 137th episode on March 2nd, 2023. My name is Andy Zee. I'm the host of the show, coming to you from Los Angeles, California.
And my name is Sunsara Taylor. I'm the co-host of the Revolution Nothing Less show. And today we have two big themes and topics that we'll be getting into. First, there is the war in Ukraine and the danger this poses and actions that the Revcoms are taking to lead opposition to the U.S.'s role in this. Also, International Women's Day is coming up March 8th. And we have a number of pieces calling you to join us in the streets to celebrate this day together with women all over the world and people who want to get free. And we're doing these two themes because both of these are crucial fault lines in the fight for a real revolution, which is the mission of this show, an actual revolution that overthrows the system of capitalism, imperialism, that rules over us and all of humanity and causes such hell, a revolution to emancipate all of humanity.
And throughout today's program, you're going to be hearing about and seeing Bob Avakian, a revolutionary leader whose leadership and whose theoretical work we base this program, the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. Bob Avakian has developed the science of communism, the science of revolution that we call the new communism, and he's authored a constitution for a new socialist republic in North America. Sunsara, we want to begin the program, as you said, with a statement that the Revcoms made this past week, delivered by the spokesperson for the Revolution Club's Noche Diaz. It was made in torrential rains here in Los Angeles. We held a press conference in any case, and we're going to show you an excerpt of the key part of this statement.
1 year ago today, February 24th, Russia began its illegal invasion of Ukraine. In the past year, tens of thousands and perhaps hundreds of thousands have died in the fighting. Millions more have been casualties of the collateral damage of war and been made refugees. While we see the horror in this destruction and devastation, the rulers of the U.S. have seen opportunity, licking their chops, jumping at the chance to throw Ukrainians to the meat grinder of Russia's war machine. They saw the opportunity, the chance to use Ukrainian soldiers with U.S. weapons to weaken America's imperialist rival, Russia, and to greatly expand the U.S.-NATO military alliance and its presence and domination throughout Europe and beyond. Both sides are now preparing for further offensives as the U.S. and NATO pour billions more into Ukraine, provide further weaponry as well as deep intelligence and strategic planning. This last year has also seen a massive escalation of the U.S. threats against China. The reality is that this is a fight between big-time worldwide gangsters over turf and control, with humanity caught in the middle and hanging in the balance. The consequences have already been disastrous, and the continued spiral of escalation and potential for nuclear war threatens total catastrophe. No decent person should be joining in with U.S. imperialists in their rivalry with other imperialists. The silence so far from people of conscience in this country has been deafening. Continued silence could be deadly. This must change, and we are changing it. Starting April 2nd, and then building up again around the May Day Internationalist holiday, we will be mobilizing rallies to raise the slogans and the demands. No U.S.-NATO war with Russia. Stop U.S. threats with China. No World War III. It's this system, not humanity, that needs to go extinct. We don't accept their future. It's time to get organized for a real revolution. Further details will be coming out on these manifestations over the next weeks. But if you have a conscience and a heart for humanity, if you are increasingly alarmed by the warlike rhetoric and moves, if you are unwilling to risk the very future of humanity by going along with or supporting or staying silent in ongoing conflicts and escalating war moves between imperialist powers fighting over empire, then you need to support and be part of these actions. No one with a conscience should stand aside. The stakes are too high, and there is no safe spaces or minding your own business in the event of world war and nuclear Armageddon. Everyone, we challenge everyone, and to think deeply about the following words from Bob Avakian. What is called for and urgently needed now is to oppose all imperialist marauders and mass murderers and all systems and relations of oppression and exploitation, while giving particular emphasis to opposing our own imperialist oppressors who commit monstrous crimes in our name and seek to rally us to support them on the basis of a grotesque American chauvinism, which we must firmly reject and fiercely struggle against. The world, the future that the rulers of the U.S. and these other imperialists are fighting for is not only cruel, deadly, and insane, it is also not the only world and the only future that is possible. We Revcoms who follow Bob Avakian are taking responsibility to rally and build this determined opposition as part of working for a revolution. A revolution that does have a future for humanity that is worth living in. When we replace this system through revolution, not only will we close shop on all the hundreds of military bases around the world belonging to what will then be the former USA, also the Constitution we put in place will outlaw nuclear weapons and advocate for their elimination throughout the world. To end once again with Bob Avakian, we can no longer afford to allow these imperialists to dominate the world and to determine the destiny of humanity. They need to be overthrown as quickly as possible. No U.S.-NATO war with Russia. Stop U.S. threats against China. No World War III. It's this system, not humanity, that needs to go extinct. We don't accept their future. It's time to get organized for a real revolution. Thank you.
So that was Noche Diaz delivering the statement from the Revcoms on the necessity for us and all of you to act against this inter-imperialist war and in the interests of humanity. You can read the full statement on revcom.us and follow the website as well as this program and our social media to find out about developments towards and plans for April 2nd and then the action that's going to follow on May 1st. We want to begin this segment on the Ukraine with a skit that was done by Rafael Cadaris and the RNL Company that answers an editorial that was in the New York Times. This is very important because they put forward the kind of position that has tremendous influence in society today. After that, we're going to move to the International Women's Day part of our program. And after the segment on International Women's Day, we're going to come back with an interview I did today with Paul Street, a historian and a member of the editorial board of Refuse Fascism and a friend of this show, speaking about the war in Ukraine and the interests of humanity. So let's go to the skit now.
Hi, I'm Rafael Cadaris with the Revolution Nothing Less show, and my guest today is a liberal New York Times reader. Welcome.
Hey, did you read this editorial in the New York Times?
No, what does it say?
It's about why the US should keep sending more and more weapons to Ukraine fighting Russia, even though it risks nuclear war.
That sounds like a terrible idea.
But it says right here that there's a moral and ethical obligation of the world's democracies to help a nation whose freedom is threatened by an authoritarian power.
Oh, really? So are they advocating for the world's democracies to arm Palestinians against the fascist Israeli apartheid state, which has been brutally occupying Palestinian lands for decades?
No, definitely not.
Okay, so when they talk about authoritarian powers, they're just talking about America's enemies. Got it.
Just whatever, don't worry about that. It says right here that national self-determination has long been a guiding principle of American foreign policy. Guiding principle of American foreign policy.
You gotta be kidding me. Was national self-determination the guiding principle when the U.S. waged a war against Mexico and stole half the land?
But
how about when the U.S. colonized Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines and Guam?
But
what about when the CIA helped to overthrow popular leaders and governments in Iran, Guatemala, Congo, Indonesia, Chile, Honduras, and more?
it doesn't seem like it, but...
Or when the U.S. slaughtered millions in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan.
Okay, I see what you mean. While they admit that this guiding principle hasn't been followed perfectly, they do write that Russians may argue that the United States is hardly the innocent in its global dealings, whether invading Iraq on false pretenses or covertly working to overthrow governments in, among others, Chile and Nicaragua. Certainly, there is much to criticize and debate in American foreign policy during and since the Cold War.
Those things are not a matter of debate. They're a matter of fact.
Okay, but the editorial still insists that America has this guiding principle of defending democracy and self-determination, and that's why we have to help Ukraine. That's why we have to help Ukraine. That's why we have to help Ukraine.
Look, in order to help you understand the poisonous American chauvinist logic you're being indoctrinated with, let's go to some leaked footage we obtained from the New York Times editorial board.
Hey, Sarah, look, write this down. I'm looking over this draft that you sent me. Make sure that you say America's founding principles are democracy and self-determination.
But what about slavery and genocide of the Native people? The discrimination, police murder, mass incarceration that still goes on?
Just say we're moving towards a more perfect union. Just say we're moving towards a more perfect union. Perfect union. Perfect union. Look, we're moving there. I mean, yeah, we may carry out conquests, invasions, coups, and we may violently interfere in all sorts of countries around the world.
Yeah, we intervene in Latin America like over 100 times.
Yeah, you see, look, we do this for a greater purpose, or at least, in opposition to a greater evil. Look, we do this for a greater purpose, or at least, in opposition to a greater evil, greater evil, greater evil.
But isn't the U.S. the only country that has ever used nuclear weapons and actually incinerated like hundreds of thousands of Japanese civilians?
Okay, Samantha. Yeah, look, we did that to save lives, especially the lives of American soldiers. Look, we did that to save lives, especially the lives of American soldiers. American soldiers. American soldiers.
Got it.
I mean, I know there's this whole thing about we broke our promise to the Russians in the 90s not to expand NATO or militarily surround Russia. But, I mean...
Isn't that one of the main reasons for this war?
But, look, let's emphasize the fact that the people in those countries, they asked for NATO. All right, Sarah?
Sounds fair and balanced to me. Sounds fair and balanced to me. Sounds fair and balanced to me.
You see what the New York Times is doing here? All of America's crimes get explained away, dismissed as insignificant or irrelevant, because America is a force for good in the world. But this is complete bullshit.
It's starting to sound like the guiding principle is imperialist domination and plunder.
Exactly. And that's the same principle that's driving the proxy war the U.S. is waging in Ukraine. Not helping the people there, but using them as cannon fodder against their Russian imperialist rivals. And liberal media like the New York Times is bamboozling you into going along with it. As Bob Avakian put it, the so-called free press in this country is nothing more than the propaganda instrument of the capitalist imperialist ruling class.
It doesn't sound much different than the Kremlin propaganda that they are constantly denouncing.
Go to revcom.us to get the truth about the war in Ukraine and the real interests of humanity.
International Women's Day, March 8th, is less than a week away. This is an opportunity to come out of your homes, to stand up, to speak out, to march, rage, dream, dare, and act together with others across this country and all over the world, in Colombia and Mexico, in India and Iran, across Europe and Africa and everywhere else, to break the chains that bind women. Let us lift our sights.
What if women could walk down the street and look every man they encounter straight in the eye and fear nothing and not be made to feel? And not be made to feel that you're on display and to be evaluated by how you sexually titillate them. What if no more women were ever again battered, raped, assaulted, denied the right to control their own bodies? What if people who were different in their sexual orientation or just in the way they went through life, instead of being discriminated against and bullied, were valued for their difference? If that were seen as part of the great diversity of humanity.
When you come out to the International Women's Day marches and celebrations being organized in this country by the Revcoms, when you bring everyone you can to be there with you, and when you meet people at these celebrations who are very different than you, but standing up for the very same reasons, when you stand with and send your strength back to the women rising up all over the world, you will experience a taste of that liberated future that Bob Avakian just spoke of. And you will be part of bringing that future closer for women and girls and humanity as a whole all over this planet. You will be doing this at a time when the prospects for revolution in this country are more real than they have been in our lifetimes, even as the dangers are greater too. Coming to International Women's Day this year is part of creating the conditions where people can make a real, all-the-way revolution that can sweep all that is wrong in this world off the face of this earth and bring into being a radically new, revolutionary society on the road to real emancipation. So do whatever you can to get to Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, or the Bay Area for rallies, marches, and celebrations on Wednesday, March 8th, and Saturday, March 11th that the Revcoms are organizing, or bring the message of revolution into International Women's Day gatherings wherever you can find them. We are putting details on the screen, and we'll include them in the description below of the gatherings that we are organizing in the cities I mentioned. And to give you a fuller sense of why we need to be in the streets this International Women's Day, we are thrilled to share with you an incredible poem that was just published at revcom.us and read powerfully here in our studio by Annie Day.
Because we rage. Because they took away your right to abortion and forced your sisters across the country to have children against their will, and because they're coming for birth control next. Because your young sisters still cut themselves, still think about suicide, still get bullied in the halls and shamed on social media, and yes, raped when they dare to trust. Because if you are trans and young, you are hounded by bullies and by those in power in Texas and Florida and America. And you are still stigmatized for being lesbian or gay in 2023. Because you can't even put the word woman in a sentence anymore with the word oppression without some fool raising an objection, while the horror hits worse every single day. Because our brothers and sons and dads and uncles and tios and our daughters and sisters and moms and aunties too become statistics and hashtags for saying the wrong thing, for making a wrong move, for having the wrong skin in a country that's really been wrong from the start. Because your chances of dying when you give birth in America are over 3 times greater if you are black than if you're white. Because of evictions, because of raising children in shelters, because of fascist maggots with their incitements to violence against women go viral, one worse than the next. Because of pornography being the default sex education for 9-year-olds. Because religious fanatics, be they Christian, Islamic, Hindu, or Jewish, pronounce you unclean and want to dominate and control you even more. Because women and children in Jakarta and Lagos and Mexico City and Atlanta and Kentucky and South Dakota get trafficked and vanish without a trace. Because you're told to brand yourself, think about that word, and to sell yourself with no greater ambition than to someday yourself be a player too. Because the blood and sweat and 12-hour days of billions of sisters in Asia and around the world is ground into your clothes and your phones. Because this system commodifies everything and everyone and is killing us all. Because our world could get blown up or dried up or burnt up by the powers that be for the system they run, and we haven't even had a chance. Because we struggle. Because your sisters in Iran rose up against religious tyrants, cast off their headscarves, and sacrificed even their lives so their sisters could breathe free. And because men joined them across the country and even giving their lives in the cause of justice. Because your sisters in Mexico rose up against the killings and disappearances of thousands of women a year for the crime of walking this planet with a vagina. Because your sisters in Argentina and Colombia rose up in green, proudly demanding the right to abortion. Because young people in America took the streets last spring when the word leaked out on what the fascist Supreme Court was about to do and then did. Because we dare to think, to cry, and ask why, and defy those who say we are lesser, to resist and struggle, to speak out and shout no to the madness, to say yes to reason, to laugh and to dream of and work for and fight for a world that we will set free. Because we hope and dream and think for full liberation. Because bad as it is, with worse yet to come, this system is coming apart, and out of that stench we can wrench something much better. Because we have a plan and a vision for a whole better way, a real revolution with a new constitution to uproot the wrongs and put things right. Because there's a way to understand how we got into this situation and how to get out. A new communism with a scientific method we can all learn to wield. Because there's a strategy that we can use to get free against heavy odds. Because there's the leadership we need to wage that great fight. Because, as the revolutionary leader and thinker Bob Avakian says, there is not going to be any liberating struggle, any liberating real revolution that doesn't have right at the heart of it, at the core of it, the emancipation of women from every way in which they are degraded and debased and oppressed and violently suppressed. International Women's Day 2023. Be there. Shout, struggle, learn, love. Be part of the revolution. Because revolution, nothing less.
As she just said, International Women's Day 2023. Be there. Shout, struggle, learn, love. Be part of the revolution. Because revolution, nothing less. Now, we want to make very clear that coming out and waging this fight on International Women's Day and going forward is not just something for women to do. This is the responsibility of everyone, including, yes, men, who want to end oppression in any form. Bob Avakian has spoken to this very incisively in a quotation that we have been taking out to the masses of people, including the most oppressed, as we have been building for the International Women's Day gatherings this year. He says, quote, "You cannot break all the chains except one. You cannot say you want to be free of exploitation and oppression, except you want to keep the oppression of women by men. You can't say you want to liberate humanity, yet keep one half the people enslaved to the other half. The oppression of women is completely bound up with the division of society into masters and slaves, exploiters and exploited, and the ending of all such conditions is impossible without the complete liberation of women. All this is why women have a tremendous role to play, not only in making revolution, but in making sure there is all the way revolution. The fury of women can and must be fully unleashed as a mighty force for proletarian revolution." End quote. This is so important to understand and to act on that Andy asked Bob Avakian to speak on this during the interviews that he and I had the honor and the privilege of conducting with him last fall. So what we want to do now is share with you a portion of Bob Avakian's answer to this question from Andy, and after that we will share footage from Pete on the street showing what got opened up when we took this quote out to the people as part of inviting them to the International Women's Day marches and celebrations that we are hosting.
I want to move to it, just in the time we have, to a direct question that affects the people who do need to be part of this revolution, where you've said that, and I'm just going to read this quotation, "You can't break all the chains except one. You cannot say you want to be free of all the exploitation and oppression, except you want to keep the oppression of women by men." I think while you've touched on that in this discussion of the fascists, I think this is I know this is a big question among men of all strata, but it's very important, and it's a big part of our revolution if we actually are going to get to one, make a revolution, and two, have it a revolution that is leading towards the emancipation of all humanity. So before we move off of this, I'd like you to speak to that.
Well, in part, the thing about you can't do away with all oppression except, the oppression of women. You can't say you want to be for liberation, but you want to enslave women. And it goes back to the Lead Belly song and everything else, for men, including men who are brutally exploited and oppressed under the system and murderously, subjected to all kinds of degradation and literal murder. There's still a question of there's one sphere, or at least, one concentrated sphere where you can act like the oppressor and feel like you're getting over. And that's, that's your relationship with your woman and with women in general. It comes out in the most outrageous ways too. I just have to say this because it really gets to me. You hear some of these basic, and people say don't say basic, but I'm going to say basic because they're people catching hell right under at the base of society. You hear some of these men, say things like, when you talk to them or go to them about the right to abortion and how we have to stand up for the right, and they'll say, well, blah, blah, blah. But if she didn't want to get pregnant, she should have kept her legs closed. And nobody's telling these motherfuckers, you just keep your dick in your pants, okay? See, nobody, they don't want to hear that, right? So, all this bullshit is just a way of women should be subordinate to men. That's what it says in the Bible. Someone will tell you, that's just the way it is naturally and so on. This is among the oppressed, people suffering terribly, I'm talking about, although they are not the only ones, who do this by any means. And, I will say, just on a personal note, that for me, in my own development as a revolutionary and communist, I would say it has been a lifelong process of a continually deepening understanding of, the horrific nature of the oppression of women, but also the pivotal and central role of the struggle for the emancipation of women in the overall communist revolution to emancipate all humanity from every form of oppression and exploitation. So, this really is, crucial in the whole struggle. There is not going to be any liberating struggle, any liberating real revolution that doesn't have right at the heart of it, at the core of it, the emancipation of women from every way in which they're degraded and debased and oppressed and, violently suppressed. And, this is a lot of struggle. Now, look, I've talked about backward shit that people are into, but there also are, positive things where, not only among young women, but even some of the young men, including among the oppressed, have taken a better stand on this because they can identify, at least on as a first step, beginning basis, they can identify with people who are being oppressed. And then sometimes it's there's more largeness of mind involved. They don't want oppression of any kind, as much as they understand that. They're against it. So there's contention out there. But, in order, like I said, in order to have this revolution, this has to be at the core of it. It's not the only form of oppression. It has to be uprooted, obviously, but it is right at the core of transforming the whole world. This historic and, thousands of year old oppression of women in different forms in different societies, and it's been completely bound up with the division of society overall into masters and slaves, into oppressors and oppressors, exploiters and exploiters. You go back in history, it's completely bound up with that and has run through every form of oppression and exploitation, going back to days of slavery right up to the modern capitalism, imperialism, and all its forms of oppression.
We're looking for everybody who has ever wondered if women could be liberated from a world of exploitation, male supremacy, and all forms of gender oppression, to come be part of International Women's Day. We need a revolution, nothing less, to free women from centuries of oppression as part of freeing humanity from all forms of oppression.
You saying about how women are this, what about men?
Okay, both. What is this about?
Right. Talk about both.
Talking about women.
Talk about both, though.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
I think it's the truth. You walk around, you don't hear too much about men, but you hear a lot about women.
What are some of the things that you hear?
Everything. Women being beat. I've seen it before, actually. With my own two eyes, I've seen everything happen to women. Like, I'm a woman myself.
Actually,
I go
we
through
seen it the
stuff.
other day, remember? Or not the other day, but a couple weeks ago. We was at the gas station, and this girl was like screaming. And we was remember?
Yeah.
He was stalking her in the car.
And she was screaming.
We was trying to help her, so we like, okay, maybe we should help her. He must have socked her and pulled straight off. I was like...
And sometimes when you're like in a relationship and somebody's like beating on you, it's really hard to leave as a woman. It's really hard.
Yeah, I don't like that either. People be like, well, you should just leave, or it's not hard to pack your bags and go. People be scared for their life, scared for their kids. If they have kids, what if I leave and he find me? People are really crazy, actually. And he was talking all that mess.
We're looking for everybody who is infuriated by the Supreme Court overturning the right to abortion, where now women across this country are being reduced to incubators.
What if it's a young girl and she doesn't know what she's getting herself into? She doesn't know what she has to live through or what she has to go through. What if a woman wants to go to school and learn and get an education? What if she's not ready to have a kid and have a life? And, it's just messed up that women have to go through that, through motherhood so early or when they're not ready.
How would that affect like someone like you or your friends, what you actually have to go through in your daily life?
Well, for me, I go to school and I'm trying to get a bachelor's degree in college right now. So me, I wouldn't be ready. Like if someone told me right now, oh, you're going to be forced to go into motherhood, you're going to have a child, I would be like, what? Like, no, I don't want to, and I don't want to go through that yet. I'm not saying that, if someone wants to have a kid or go through that right away, if you want to go through that, that's fine. But if someone doesn't want to or someone is like forced into it, I don't think that's right. Because me, I wouldn't want to go through that. I wouldn't want to be suffering through that when I want to have my future and how I want to live it. Like, I shouldn't be living it based on what somebody else has to tell me.
Women are judged a lot. I mean, Same thing for men, but it's really hard out here for women. Like,
Can you imagine a world where that wasn't the case, where it was radically different, where women could actually walk down the street without being judged?
can I imagine it? No, I actually couldn't imagine it because it's in people's heads, like how men are, you know? I couldn't imagine a world where you could just walk down the street freely and, you know, not hear cat calling, somebody whispering at you or something like that. Anything like that, you know? It's really hard out here.
I feel bad for like women just in general because they always have to be watching their bag. They have to carry pepper spray or an item, a weapon or whatever on them. And you know, it's also scary to like walk in the night. You can't even walk in the night anymore.
Can you imagine a world without that? Like, have you even thought about, you know, if this didn't have to be this way?
Honestly, I haven't thought about it, but it would be pretty. I think it would be more peaceful, more nicer, just more. I feel like people could be more open about things. They wouldn't have to worry about this or this happening to them. Just a really safe, peaceful world. But I believe that. I don't think that could ever come to it, but maybe I'm hoping, but I don't think so just because everyone's different and everyone has different intentions. Yeah, but I hope it could come to that.
If you've ever thought if women could walk down the street and look every man in the eye and fear nothing, if you've ever wondered if we could live in a world where women are treated and viewed as full human beings, then you have to be part of International Women's Day.
It is so striking to hear those young women talk about the fears they live with, the violence they've seen, just for being born female in a world of male domination. And it is striking as well to hear how difficult it is for them to imagine a world free of all this. And there are billions just like them all over this planet. But there is a way to end this oppression, a real revolution, and a whole new liberating future, and there is a way to be part of fighting for this now. This is hidden from people, but this is what the Revcoms are bringing to people this International Women's Day. This is what you will learn about and help bring alive to others when you come out as well. Together, we can tear away the oppressive veil that has people going along with all the horrible and unacceptable treatment of women here and all over the planet, and the whole system that this is coming from. Together, we can make an advance in putting real revolution on the map by marching and celebrating this International Women's Day. So come out and join us in saying, capitalism and patriarchy, you can't end one without ending the other. Abortion on demand and without apology. Forced motherhood is female enslavement. Break the chains. Unleash the fury of women as a mighty force for revolution.
I want to welcome my friend Paul Street to the RNL show. Paul is a historian and he's a member of the editorial board of Refuse Fascism. He has a Substack, Paul Street Report, and he writes for Counterpunch. Paul, welcome to the RNL show.
Thanks a lot, Andy. How you doing?
I'm doing good. So, Paul, you wrote an article that first appeared on your Substack blog and then on Counterpunch titled Ukraine War Reflections. And you identified 9 arguments with a movement that thinks of itself as progressive and even radical, even a left. And yet you describe this as a shattered and lame U.S. left whose arguments are darkly comedic. And we published your piece on revcom.us. So I want to start with asking you, why did you write this piece? What provoked you?
Well, first of all, it is absolutely my responsibility, our responsibility here in the United States, above all, to take aim at and criticize our own national capitalist imperialist power. I think you lose credibility if you don't acknowledge from the beginning that, yes, Putin is a butcher. Yes, Russia has a neo-fascist regime. Yes, Russia committed atrocities in Bucha and elsewhere. Yes, Putin's invasion is criminal. Yes, Putin did not have to go to war. He was provoked, but he was not compelled to. He was not forced to go to war. You get that out of the way, and that's true. But I don't live in Russia. Russians need to deal with that. Marxists here, socialists here need to be reaching out to socialists and Marxists and peace-oriented human beings in Russia. And Russians need to be forming a movement against their own capitalist imperialist country. We're here. We're here in the United States of America, which happens to be the number one top imperialist aggressor state, not only in the world, but in world history. And as bad as what the Russians are doing, and incidentally, what they're doing is on their own very directly proximate geographic border that has been invaded repeatedly by the West with millions of deaths. Napoleon, Hitler, coming through Ukraine, coming through Eastern Europe. I mean, think about the geographic inversion. What would the United States be doing if Russia or China were involved in a military alliance with Mexico or Canada, directly on our borders, But so it's here, and nothing Russia has done as awful as what Russia is doing, and it is criminal, and it is horrible, and Putin belongs behind bars, absolutely. But this does not compare in scale to what the United States has done in Iraq, to what the United States has done in Afghanistan, what the United States did historically in Central America and in Southeast Asia. There is no bigger, more crass and cynical violator of international law than the United States of America. It is the number one imperialist aggressor state, and therefore has no moral or legal ground to stand on, really, seriously. And this is understood around the global South. It's completely understood across most of the world that the United States has no ground whatsoever to stand on in accusing people of breaking international law. It's exactly what it has done. Joe Biden himself led the cheers on the Democratic side of the U.S. Senate in 2002 for the use of force authorization to let George W. Bush invade Iraq illegally and on false pretenses if he wanted to. And guess what? He did. And millions died.
You decimate and this is related, the position of what you call national U.S. chauvinism, I believe, but it's that the U.S. is defending Ukraine's right to self-determination, a claim that is bound up with Biden's characterization of this war as a war for democracy against Putin's autocracy. So I'd like you to speak a little bit about this, not just in terms of the left, but though they do completely take up these terms of democracy, but its effect more broadly on the masses of people here.
Well, I think in a lot of complex historical situations, and this is a doozy, as I say it as a historian, there's a lot of things going on at the same time. There is, at some level, there's a legitimate struggle for self-determination by the Ukrainian people. They have, in fact, been illegally and criminally invaded. There's a Russian imperial objective that, in some ways, in some really out of whack hyperbole, Putin announced on the day of his invasion. There's imperial objectives there and material class interests on the part of Russian oligarchs and all of this. But the United States moved very quickly, I would say really almost from the outset, to leap onto the Ukrainian cause to make something much more out of it. And they said it. They said the quiet part out loud. The leading general, the leading commander, Austin, was in Poland and said flat out at a press conference that we hope to weaken Russia. We hope to weaken Russia. Biden himself, some say it was a slip up, was heard in Poland early on to say that Putin should no longer can no longer be the leader of Russia, which, sounded kind of regime changey. And that's certainly how people around much of the rest of the world must have understood it. So it went way beyond defending Ukrainian right to self-determination, and very quickly became something that was very much about an inter-imperial geopolitical conflict with a perceived imperial rival, which, by the way, is fighting on its own direct southwestern border, right? Which is no one ever seems to want to talk about. And like in the U.S. invasion of Iraq, it was necessary to have a whole propaganda ideological framework and set in place to justify this provocation. And we don't have all the time to do all the history, but the U.S. and NATO have been provoking Russia, what's called poking the bear, ever since the fall, well, and even before the end of the Soviet Empire. And so they say this is and you see parts of the left playing along with this rhetoric that this is a great struggle between democracy, represented by the Ukrainians and supposedly the West and the U.S., and autocracy and authoritarianism represented by Russia. Well, there's no doubt whatsoever that Russia is an autocratic, right-wing, authoritarian, even in its own kind of way, a Christian white nationalist state. It's horrific. It's some argue, like Jason Stanley, that Putin is a neo-fascist. Okay, so that's true. But what about the U.S.? What, democracy? This is an open plutocracy sliding in to neo-fascism. It's a failing bourgeois democracy where majority public opinion is irrelevant and trumped and defeated again on one issue after another. What? We're the friends of democracy, and we're also the key sponsor and ally and funder and equipper and trainer and overseer of the Judeo-fascist state of Israel and its occupation of Palestine, of the open absolutist beheader regime in Saudi Arabia, of the dictatorship in Egypt. We are on the side of a right-wing neo-fascist type of coup in Peru right now. We have a history of backing third world fascist regimes, dozens of them over many decades.
Well, it's important that people understand the actual reality on the one hand and also understand the batch of lies and propaganda that they are fed. In fact, Avakian wrote right after the start of the war, I believe in April of last year, of 2022, quoting the famous saying that the first casualty of war is the truth. But I'd like to talk, in conclusion, or as a last main question here, about the stakes of this war and the dangerous head in the sand approach that too many people in this country have. You know, I guess we probably both grew up with Alfred E. Newman's infamous motto of "What me worry."
What me worry, I don't even care. What me worry, worrying can't get you anywhere.
So perfect for America and an American so-called left who's fatted on the spoils of imperialism. You wrote that a bunch of people, including no small number of left supporters of Ukraine on the one side and Russia on the other. Now, you use more colorful language, but on the one hand, these two sides are starting to remind you of Slim Pickens playing Major Kong at the end of Dr. Strangelove. So your thoughts about that?
It is just astonishing. I have heard from numerous people who are left identified and consider themselves socialists, whatever they mean by that, that really the risk of World War III coming from this is low, unlikely. That has been said to me repeatedly. It's unlikely. It probably won't happen. And it sort of raises this sort of basic question of, did you see that the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists just put the clock closer to midnight? The closest it's ever been in history. How do you just discount that? And this raises this other question of what is an acceptable level of risk of World War III? I mean, really, what, 5%, 10%? So would you like to play Russian roulette? It's just insane to me. You know, it only takes one World War III to create a nuclear winter and end life on Earth. It's just madness. And Biden himself said, we're looking possibly at Armageddon. The New York Times last Sunday had a really interesting piece. I think it was by Roger Cohen, longtime European correspondent. This thing is looking like it's going to just go into a multi-year slog, you know, with the bodies just piling higher and higher. And Putin and his pit bull Medvedev and others saying flat out, we will not tolerate a decisive victory on their own on our own borders. And so what? And then the people on the left tell me, well, they're bluffing. They don't really mean it. Really? Okay. Let's find out if that's true. And, you know, because Zelensky runs to these capitals, and there's this dance going on. You had a section on this show a while back about this, where, you know, he jumps around and begs he wants tanks. No, we don't have tanks. Okay, give him tanks. Oh, he wants this. He wants this military hardware, and he wants these defensive missiles. And he wants this. Now, freaking Biden has actually popped up in Kiev itself. How provocative is that? Imagine Xi Jinping or Putin showing up in Mexico City as part of a military alliance and during a war between Mexico and the United States of America, and probably F-16s seem inevitable at some point. Then maybe a no-fly zone. It just gets worse and worse and worse, and nobody can give in and nobody can back down, and these things take on a life of their own. It's just madness to pretend that.
I think we have to bring out the biggest problem we face right now is that the interests of the masses of people of the world are not on the stage. And until the interests of the masses of people are on the stage, where people in this country and other countries are acting against this war and demanding it stop, the choices will appear to people as between these two sides. And see, this is part of the crime of these fucking leftists, okay? This is the crime, and it's not the first time a left has done this, where they take the side of one or the other bourgeoisie and they leave the masses choosing between two murderous entities instead of getting out there themselves, yes, at risk, and standing up and saying, no, this war has to stop. Now, we believe, as revolutionary communists, Revcoms, that this opens up the possibility of a necessity for a revolution to replace a system that would even do such a thing. And this is very important because otherwise it is just talk. And their talk is talk that's leading to the status quo. And Avakian has made this point for years. The politics of the possible is the politics of monstrosity. And we are seeing that right now on a world scale level. And we have to act to stop this. I think this is very important in terms of what sits before us and why people need to understand the terms of this, and they need to understand that those who would pretend to be progressive and say, well, you shouldn't give the money for a war, you should give the money for jobs, that's actually has nothing to do with the nature of imperialism, and it leaves people paralyzed. It leaves them paralyzed to actually act in their own interests, which are absolutely opposed to this whole system.
Well, yeah, and I want to second all of that. I want to add something, which is I'm hearing people left identified, making the analogy between when Indonesia genocidally, and with U.S. green light, by the way, invaded East Timor. Wrong analogy. This is a very different sort of historical circumstances. You want the best one that I can think of, potentially, is the Cuban Missile Crisis. Which is when the midnight clock really was the closest that it ever was. And I would really like people to study that and look back on some of the literature and look up the histories of the Cuban Missile Crisis, because it did get out of control. It's almost a miracle. My father told me this, people were calling each other up on the telephone and saying goodbye with some very good reasons. But for the decision of one Soviet sub-commander to oppose the decision of a higher up commander to go ahead and use a tactical nuclear weapon in the Saragossa Sea in the South Atlantic on Black Saturday in October of 1962, we wouldn't even be here talking about any of this. These things can escalate out of control like that. The Slim Pickens analogy I was making was from the movie that was so popular called Dr. Strangelove, that helped drive the rise of the New Left to some extent in the 1960s, which depicted precisely such a situation.
Hey, what about Major Kong?
Well, look, I think that's actually a good place to end. So, Paul, I want to thank you again for being on the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show and for continuing to write columns that get up on Counterpunch, as well as your own Substack blog and report that makes a big difference. And we've got to get out there and organize more people to get into more platforms where we can start fighting for the truth. And that's going to involve putting some bodies on the line and getting out there and fighting against this war and for the interests of humanity. So thank you for being on the RNL show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Andy. Great to talk.
Okay. All right, Sunsara, that brings us to the end of this, the 137th episode of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show.
Yes, it does. So one of the things that we have been emphasizing in recent weeks and need to be making a much bigger deal out of and bringing all of you into is fundraising for the movement for revolution and for this show. And our regular viewers will know that a few weeks ago we did a very successful, completed a very successful $100,000 fund drive to kick off this year, which then we need to build on. But we want to popularize some of the forms that people in the movement took up to raise this money. And we need a lot more creative involvement from many more people. So we want to share a video put together from the work that some of our comrades in Chicago did with revolutionary change jars. This was one among many forms that people can take up. They put change jars. People did this in their own homes. And the idea is when you come in the door, you throw your change in. When you have guests come over, you say, I'm raising money for the revolution. They threw their change in. And you have a movement of this. In New York, people took up these revolutionary change jars at different points, going door to door in the projects, asking everybody to throw their change in. And it adds up. So we want to show this. It's one form among many that you can take up.
So that's important, how people with very little means are finding the ways to accumulate a lot of money by spreading the fundraising for the RNL show, for Revcom.us, and for the movement of the Revcoms for an actual revolution, and especially to promote the interviews that we did on this show with Bob Avakian. But I want to say to all of our audience, we've been asking you to become supporters of this show in an ongoing way by becoming a Patreon. And number one, I want to thank the people who became Patreons in the last week. Some of it was quite generous, and these monthly donations are really important because it's what actually can sustain the show and enable us to do the kind of work that needs to be done. But I want to ask all of the rest of you to have your equivalent of the penny jar. Now, there's people there who are on fixed incomes who are putting 50 cents, 75 cents in a day, maybe even $2 of change in a day. Can't some of you be putting $2, $10 and a $20 bill in every day or every week, and then at the end of the month be sending us a donation or putting it aside and then having it be an automatic donation off of your credit card? I think so. And we need to be having donations to this movement in the hundreds and thousands of dollars if we're going to seriously build the kind of movement that is needed to overthrow this beast that is threatening literally the annihilation of either all of humanity or life as we have known it through this war, through the devastation of the climate change, and what it's been doing to the young women and older women, and to Black people, people of color, and to everybody without means, and frankly, to the whole planet. To overthrow this system, which is the only way we get out of this madness, is going to take a great deal of money, and that money has to come from you. So with that, Sunsara, I want to say it's been another good show, and we'll see everybody next week.
All right, good night.
Oh, but what time? 5 p.m. on Thursday. Can't forget, this is the part everybody waits to find out if the time zones. Has the time zones changed, Sunsara? 5 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Central time, 8 p.m. Eastern time. And what would that mean in Mountain time? It would mean 6 p.m. So watch us next week on Thursday night. Good night.
Good night.